we are now going to be joined by Peter Dubinsky, who is the Director of Instruction in Burnaby, District 41. Peter has been a longtime champion of the MDI. He's worked with us since the pilot year. But interestingly, Burnaby doesn't collect data every single year, and that's going to be one of the topics I'm going to talk with Peter about today. Peter is focused very much on community schools in Burnaby and is also connected to the Lower Mainland Out of School Time Alliance and focuses a lot on out of school time activities and the ways that school and community can support each other in Burnaby, and has been a major driver behind social emotional learning in his district as well. So Peter, thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to make sure that your microphone is on. All right. And how are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Great. No, I just really wanted to have you here because of your length of experience with the MDI, and I think you have a really unique perspective on the whole process as well. So I thought we could just start off by talking about how does Burnaby collect MDI data? You sort of have a bit of a cycle or cohort system. I thought you could share what that looks like and tell us why that's the model you've chosen.
Sure, and so very much on the heels of what Janelle and Tricia were talking about is we very much wanted to develop a bit of a cohort approach to the data so that we're able to follow students from grade 4 all the way through to grade 7, connected actually to the EDI data as well, and look at both the community and each individual school so they could start asking those really good questions about those students and that student development between grade 4 and grade 7, and then looking ahead is, so how can we use this information from this cohort to help once they transition into secondary schools. So we were very purposeful at the beginning to kind of have a plan, a goal in mind to be mindful of these cohorts of students. That's why we have tried to do it almost every year so we could match up grade 4s to grade 7s and then watch them move on.
Great. I just want to apologize. I meant to give this lovely background of Deer Lake and Burnaby for you. I have now advanced the slide. So that's Peter. He is on our champions page at Discover MDI right now, where you can read a little bit more about his biography, see some of the questions that he's answered, and also ask him questions of your own. So that's Peter, that's Deer Lake, and sorry for the interruption. So, Peter, you're at the district level, and I'm just wondering, today we're talking about school data. So what are the tools that you use, if any, to encourage schools in your district to, access the data and make use of it? And what kind of support can you provide for them?
Yeah, so I think it's always, data is very, very tricky, and it can be a huge help, but it also can be a hindrance if it's not used appropriately. And so one of the things that we try to really focus on for schools is to look at their school data, of course, but also look at their community data, because it's a bit about not just what's happening in your school, but in your neighborhoods and your communities. And so especially when you have, we range in schools from one school of 900 students to a school's 100. And so sometimes you can look at that data and it can be very skewed depending on the size. So we want to make sure that schools understand the context of all kids in their neighborhood and then with their own students in their building. And so we encourage schools when the data comes out to look at both. It's really important for them to get a context. And then the idea is supporting schools to then take that data and start asking very specific questions that they might have been asking in terms of student social emotional development or their connectedness to school, physical, mental health, well-being, and then even what they're doing when they're not in school.
And do you feel like it's reasonable to make this request of schools to go through the data? I mean, it's a lot of stuff to go through. Do you find that people find that difficult?
Yeah, no, I think it is difficult. I think that it's a healthy balance between creating a culture where schools want to go and look at the data, so that after they've invested time in going through MDI, So why would you go through it? And how do you start to peel apart the layers? And so from a district perspective, it's giving schools permission to just enter into it with an appreciative inquiry, not look at it as overwhelming, or that you have to get into all of it. But that's why, like Tricia and Janelle have done, we've tried to weave it into their school plans. We also use a spiral of inquiry approach. And so I think the NDI lends itself to answering those questions as they're scanning to develop a focus. And I think when you do that, it tends to take away that stigma from, oh, we have to look at all the data, or it's massive amounts of numbers, and where do you begin? So that's what I see our responsibility on a district level is to give permission and then lend a helping hand to walk schools through their data, knowing their schools, and then saying, okay, here's maybe where you want to focus, so they aren't overwhelmed. Because you're right, it is it's a huge job to do.
I was wondering if you know whether any schools in your district have shared data with teachers or school staff, outside of the administrative level.
No, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things where I think we're getting the buy-in that we're getting, is because it isn't just sitting with admin, that they are, professional development days, staff meetings, that they are taking that data through with their staff, with parents. I mean, we encourage principals to share community data with parents, not the school data, but with teachers. And you have to be careful depending on size. But I think the fact that they are sharing that opens up those conversations. I think it helps with buy-in for teachers to get involved in school plans, because it isn't just about compliance and accountability. Now it's about, so what's happening for kids? And then the other thing, and perhaps the most powerful piece, is the whole concept of student voice, and allowing students to have a say in school plans, that their voice really comes through MDI, and it's hard to not listen to what they're saying to us.
And do you know if there is sort of a difference in the way the data is used between, working with kids in grade 4 versus grade 7?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know specifically. One of the things that I've been really encouraged is having conversations with our secondary schools. They are actually going and looking at the grade 7 data now. Probably not so much to grade 4, but as they start to work towards articulation and trying to prepare themselves for the students that are coming in. Our high school, we don't have middle schools in Burnaby, so high school starts in grade 8. That between counseling departments and administration, they're now looking at grade 7 MDI and asking these questions of, who are these students in our community, in our family of schools that are now coming to us? And I think that's the feedback that I've had from the high schools that are looking at that has been really positive. And it's actually helped their school plans, because now they're better prepared. What we're hearing is that the transition is much smoother, articulation is much smoother, and they're now no longer worried about those grade 8 cohorts now. They're now able to focus on the grade 9s with that gap between grade 8 and grade 10. So that's been really positive. So I think, in answer to your question, they're looking at that grade 7 data very specifically at the secondary level.
That's great. We generally release school level data in the early part of the year. Do you know if people are actually working with it at this time, or are they often waiting until the district data is available later? Just curious about the timing.
Yeah, I think it really is very dependent on the school and where they are in terms of their school plans, and that tends to guide when they start looking at their data. And so in Burnaby, our school plans, like we have a kind of a 2-tiered level of our school plan in terms of review. And so every year you have a conversation around your school plan. 1 year there's an external team that comes in and looks at the school plan, and that external team is made up of other administrators, parents on district parent advisory committee, trustees, district staff that will come in and have a conversation. And then on the other year, they'll meet with their director of instruction. And so as those conversations happen, usually from November on to the spring, they'll start to kind of look at that data. So it happens, thankfully, all throughout the year. And we want those plans to be kind of living organic documents. And so we don't want the data just to be brought out when it's released. We want them going back to it and referring to it and using the spiral where they can go back and check and see and ask more questions. So I'm pleased to say that the schools that are really accessing it, I think they're looking at it on an ongoing basis.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really important to not have it just be this one moment in a year when you get the data, and then it sort of sits until the next data release.
Right, and that's another kind of motivation for why we do it so regularly, because we want it at the forefront of their minds, right? We want them to be thinking about, when they're gearing up for MDI, oh, that's making me think about data. When you get the data, obviously you're thinking about data. And so then if that cycle continues on a fairly regular basis, it becomes again enculturated into the district that this is important, this is what we believe, this is what we know is going to be helpful. And we're doing a lot of other data collection as well, and it just complements, as the lady said previously, they're able to match it up with some of the other data sets that they're using, and so it creates that purposeful data.
So one of the advantages of doing it regularly and doing it over a long period of time is that you can then really see whether there are any changes that have occurred over the years. Is your school, is your district, improving on a given measure? Is there a significant change? But sometimes there isn't, or sometimes that change can take a little bit longer to show up. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, because we want to continually stress the importance of having access to this data and then working to make change, but that isn't an instantaneous process. And so I'm just wondering how you sort of at a district level can keep everyone engaged when it it's I don't know what the phrase is, but it's it's a battle, or it's a war, not a battle, or whatever.
Yes, yeah. You win the battle and lose the war, but yeah, and so that's been a huge learning piece for me, because I think we've always, we take our own kind of vulnerability data just at a district level, which is very individualized, and then you have the population data. And to be honest, yes, we see kind of the consistent vulnerability rate in the district hasn't really changed from either the inception of EDI through 5 years of MDI and other data that we've collected as well. And so the question becomes, like, at what point do you start to get frustrated, or are you looking for change that isn't occurring, and what does that mean? And so a big learning piece for me is actually at a session that Kim ran in the fall, where Mark Greenberg came to BC and talked a bit about a very, very large study that was done in the United States around this thing, very concept. And really what he showed, in short, is that not until the age of 25 did we really start to see massive change in behaviors, reduced anxiety, stronger mental health and wellness, physical literacy improvements. And so that was quite an epiphany for me, because it emphasized the fact that we continue to do the work. Sometimes when we don't see the large scale change that we think we should be seeing, we take solace in the fact that eventually the work pays off and students will gain and succeed and thrive because of what we're doing. And so we've tried to not de-emphasize the data, but to de-emphasize the progress in the sense that you need to be looking at a very, very localized level, be it in your classroom, being with small groups of kids, targeted groups of kids, to see small changes. And it's less important to see that 30% vulnerability drop to 20%, and that's not an indicator of the amazing work that our teachers and our principals do. So sometimes you can get bogged down with the fact that those large population-based numbers don't change. So then, but we use that to say, so dig deeper, look more closely, find that one student that needs that adult support and intervention, and that is where the real work happens. So it's a bit of a shift that we now need to make.
Yeah, and it really underscores that having any sort of data is a valuable beginning to those conversations, because you can now say, well, we know these are the things that make a difference. These are the things that we can work on, even if those results aren't realized immediately. It frames the conversation.
It's so true, and we always think, sorry, that data is the end. Like, I think in education, a lot of times we see the end piece of that assessment. It's kind of the way education has been structured. So we wait for the end of the term to get the assessment, the end of the study to get the data. And so really, it's that mindset shift now that the data is actually the beginning piece, not the end piece. That it helps guide where we want to go. It's not the end point, but the starting point.
Peter, thank you so much for coming on the call today. I really, really appreciate you sharing your perspective. And we're always just thrilled to keep working with you.